What are some serial killer facts? Facts about serial killers that you find extremely interesting. When police eventually came to the house of Ed Gein, they found an absolute pigsty. Gein had been living alone since the death of his brother in a barn fire. It's speculated that Gein may have killed him and had let much of the house go into disrepair. They found countless body parts from his various grave digging excursions, including a bag of wilted vaginas and, of course, the infamous skin lampshade and half-finished woman's suit made of human skin. There were maggots living in old bushes in the kitchen. It was the type of disorganized mess that you would expect from a man who spent his nights completely disconnected from reality. All except one room. His mother's room upstairs remained pristine, except for dust that had collected, and seemingly untouched from the time of her death years earlier. He had such a fear or respect for his mother that he was afraid to set foot in her room long after she had died. He claimed to hear her voice criticizing him from time to time. This was the central experience that inspired Norman Bates' character to maintain his mother's home image in Psycho. Also a fun fact about Gein. In Taxi Driver, Travis Bickle makes an offhand comment when leaving a diner that he had a cup of coffee and a slice of apple pie with cheese on top. In exchange for details to investigators after his capture, Gein requested the same meal. A bag of wilted vaginas. I'm going to use that as my new go-to insult. In the John Wayne G case, there were so many bodies crammed underneath the house that the bodies melted together and the bones had to be sorted for more than 2 years to put together the full skeletons. Piggybacking on this, since it's on JWG and I just read a book on him, apparently one of the ways he would de-escalate a police search for his victims was by calling into the police station anonymously and reporting a fake sighting of the victim. This led the police to believe that the victims had not in fact been missing, but instead had run away, thus deprioritizing their search. The Hillside Stranglers picked up a young woman to murder. Then they discovered that her father was Peter Lorre, a legendary Hollywood character actor. They let her go because they feared that killing a celebrity's daughter would bring too much attention down. Jeffrey Dahmer gave the people in his apartment building sandwiches that could have possibly been made from his victim's flesh. I went to Marquette University in Milwaukee, not far from Dahmer's apt building, when the news broke. My boyfriend at the time was riding the bus and a lady was freaking out and crying uncontrollably. She lived in the building and he apparently hosted cookouts regularly. I always think about the PTSD the first cop to open the refrigerator must have. Jeffrey Dahmer, towards the end right before he got caught, had so many bodies in his apartment that he ran out of room and stored one victim in his bathtub. He proceeded to shower over him every day for a month. Think about that, straddling over a rotten corpse to get fresh and clean for the day. Unreal. Probably the same thought most of us have when we look at a mess we procrastinate about picking up as well. I really need to take care of that. The serial killer Bela Kiss liked to pickle people in barrels stored in his basement. Someone figured it out, but they couldn't get him because he was fighting in World War I. By the time they tracked him down, he had disappeared and left a dead guy in his hospital bed. He supposedly joined the French Foreign Legion and deserted that too. And I think history loses track of him after that, with the exception of one possible sighting as a janitor in New York. The janitor disappeared before anyone could confirm it. I believe the only reason they found the barrels was because they believed he was storing gas and there was a massive shortage on it at the time. Bela was away at war, so they broke in his garage to find the barrels, only they didn't find gasoline. The Golden State Killer, known at the time as the East Area Rapist, would often break into the homes of couples, making the woman tie up the man. He would stack dishes on the back of the man and threaten that if he heard the dishes fall, he would kill everyone in the house. Then he would rape the woman repeatedly and ransack the house for hours. At a community meeting about the rapist, a macho man stood up and went on a rant about how a real man would never let such a thing happen to him or his wife. The rapist proceeded to attack that man and his wife soon after, meaning he was attending the community meeting about himself. This gave me chills when I first read it, and I'll be gone in the dark. Whenever I read about the BTK killer waiting for one of his next victims to come home and then getting frustrated and leaving due to her running late, it gives me chills. That woman cheated death. There's also another story where he broke into a lady's house, but thankfully she was home, and he left a message on her mirror that basically said, "I wish you were home," or something like that. I find it interesting that apparently the BTK killer installed alarms at several people's houses because of their fear of the BTK killer. Supply and demand. The Angel Vargas killed and ate at least 10 people. He only ate men because he said their meat tasted better than women's. He also wouldn't eat fat people because he thought they contained too much cholesterol. Journalist Vlado Tanescu was caught when he reported on his own crimes and included information that hadn't been released to the public and only the killer could know. While police still have no suspect in these killings, it is likely that he is a really cool and handsome dude. We should all, go easy on him. He's smart too. Mac Ray Edwards. He was a serial killer who worked for Caltrans. He'd kill his victims and then bury the bodies in places he would later help build the highways over. Not all his victims have been found, and many are very likely still under some of the California highways you may have driven over countless times. But I bet we drive over a lot more buried corpses than we'd ever be comfortable knowing. Albert Fish would stick needles into his pelvis when he was masturbating. Stick them so deep sometimes they would get stuck. He told this to police. They didn't believe him until they saw the x-ray. In the 70s there was a serial killer who was known for raping and killing women. He went on a dating show and the woman ended up choosing him, but luckily she cancelled the date just before. You can find a video on YouTube. It's really creepy. Rodney Alcala. Dennis Rader, aka BTK, bind, torture, kill, started communicating with police after years of silence in 2004-ish. He had gone decades without being caught and once again started sending taunting letters and items to them. He asked them if he could be traced if he sent them his writings on a floppy disk, and they assured him through a communication in a newspaper that no, they couldn't trace him. He sent them a floppy disk and they found metadata linking to his church. He was arrested shortly thereafter. He was hurt that they would lie to him because he thought they had developed a rapport. You cheated. Not fair. John Norman Collins used to pick up women on his motorcycle. The bodies of his victims, women, used to be dumped here and there, but they were always washed. Turns out he only killed women who were on their period. Also, he was referred to as John Norman Collins during his trial. He later changed his last name to Chapman because there was a lawyer in town whose name was John Collins, and this was a way to distinguish between them. Brazilian serial killer Little Petty murdered over 40 people in prison. He began by murdering the gang that killed his girlfriend and then stabbing his father, who was in prison for killing his mother, during a visit. He was one-liked because he was considered a sort of vigilante avenger, despite killing indiscriminately within prison. No difference between drug possession and a murderer. Because of Brazil's odd sentencing laws, he could only serve a maximum of 30 years, and is currently a YouTuber and ranch hand, I think. Many years ago I read the entire police report on the Green River Killer. I was fascinated by his attempts to cover his tracks by buying new car tires and destroying shoes and getting new ones after murders, to avoid leaving traceable tracks behind. Also fascinating that he took the jewelry off his victims and left it in the ladies' restroom at his workplace and got off on seeing the found jewelry on various women around the office. I was fascinated by the explanation Green River Gary gave for stopping for long periods of time. The time spent cleaning up afterwards and taking counter-forensic measures just was not worth the murder after a while. Pragmatic guy. Didn't see if this had been commented, so apologies if it was. Edmund Kemper, also known as the Co-Ed Killer, committed a series of murders and rapes in California before finally killing his abusive mother, at which point he drove to Arizona, called the police, confessed to everything, and waited for them to pick him up at the payphone. He provided intimate details of the case before he could get representation, so there was no way to get out of being found guilty for his crimes. In court, a lawyer asked him what he felt was a just punishment for what he'd done. He thought about it and replied, "Death by torture." To this day, he declines to attend parole hearings and has repeatedly asserted that people like him do not belong in society. Very interesting and seemingly self-aware dude. Still a freaking psycho though. My grandfather was a social worker that managed Ed Gein, the butcher of Plainfield, when he was at Winnebago Mental Health Institute. He told us that Ed was one of the sweetest old men he had ever talked to. Really nice guy. Like to ask about how the workers' families were doing. It's not the strangest thing on this thread, but for me, it's eerie how he could go from a sweet old man to a man who made furniture from human skin and body parts. Still weirds me out to this day. TBF. Gein didn't kill a lot of people either, he was more obsessed with digging up dead bodies. He is actually the one serial killer I have sympathy for because it is clear as day that his mom fricked him up beyond repair. She was a freaking monster who destroyed the mental health of her child. Aside from the killing, BTK is such a self-serving, pompous piece of crap. He actually makes people fill out an application to write him in prison. That most serial killers have roughly average, often below average IQs, and their reputation as smart and difficult to catch is because of a couple of high-profile outliers and the fact that their victims are usually the sort of people who cops and society don't pay as much attention to. It's an uncomfortable fact that a murder with no witnesses and no obvious motive is by its own nature extremely difficult to solve. By targeting people you have no relation to, with only intrinsic motive, your chances of being caught are already slim. Many victims did survive David Parker Ray, the toy box killer, but did not remember it, as he would kidnap victims, use them as sex slaves for a few months, drug them, and clean them thoroughly before dropping them off unconscious at the side of the road hundreds of miles away. Only some women picked up by him were killed, still more than enough to be classified as a serial killer. There are audio recordings, 2 parts, that have been re-recorded with an actor. I cannot unhear them. Definitely NSFL. Sick frick. I will not post a link, but they're very easy to find. Jeffrey Dahmer was neglected by his parents in childhood and hadn't even seen his mother for 10 years prior to incarceration. At sentencing, his father and stepmother asked for 10 minutes to say goodbye and hug. His father often visited him in prison and he had weekly phone calls with his mother. Despite the heinous crimes, they seem to have some kind of unconditional love. It makes all of the stories I hear about estrangement seem to have a different, strange perspective. Dahmer's father wrote an autobiography. Some heartbreaking crap when you love your son, but he's Jeffrey Dahmer. I don't recall which one it was, but I remember hearing that there was a killer who would only go into the home if the front door was unlocked because otherwise he didn't feel welcome. Lock your doors, people. Issei Segura, a cannibal who was caught in France and pronounced insane. However, after going to a mental asylum in Japan, they declared him as being sane. He checked out straight after. He's still free to this day if I remember correctly, and in interviews has stated that he may kill and eat human flesh again. While I was watching the interviews, I felt beyond unsettled. Really doesn't make me feel better that he's still out there. Mark Brandon Reed, aka Chopper, was a renowned killer in Australia. However, he only targeted drug dealers and people who made attempts on his life. When he got old, he was told he had liver cancer and had only a few weeks to live. He was asked by the television show 60 Minutes Australia if he wanted one last interview before he died. He accepted. When asked about all the murderers, which he previously claimed as self-defense, not him or he covered them up, he just confessed to all of them, claiming they were never self-defense and he had committed the ones he previously denied. Then he passed away a few weeks later, went out listing everyone he killed. It shocked everyone. I would suggest looking him up. He's very interesting. Chopper really was a wild dude. Really good storyteller. Could actually be quite charming. Looking at some videos of him, it can sometimes be easy to forget that he was a guy that had killed people. In 1985, the Night Stalker was terrorizing LA. I was a young Marine there and a friend asked if me and another guy would come stay the night since her parents had to go out of town. I thought it was silly. He hadn't hit Orange County, but anything to get out of the barracks. That night he hit just a few houses down in Mission Viejo. Some kid heard him and alerted his dad, who called the cops. That was the first lead they got. It has always bugged me that I didn't take it seriously at all, and it happened that close. I think we were pretty drunk that night. It was pretty sobering. The first serial killer on written record is from 5th century Yemen. Also, according to an FBI and private study in the US in 2018, they estimate anywhere between 152,000 active serial killers in the US. Boy, that's a widespread. Edmund Kemper, Co-ed killer, please google him, just not before after eating. Is just a really crazy dude. Apart from the fact he was nearly 7 feet, the main thing that stuck out to me, he was so smart that only 6 years after killing both his paternal grandparents and being diagnosed as criminally insane, he convinced psychiatrists he was rehabilitated before he went on a violent killing spree and then turned himself in, totally of his own volition, as the police had no idea who he was. Jeffrey Dahmer was arrested for sexual assault of a Southeast Asian boy. After he got out of prison and started his sex zombie initiative, he abducted the brother of the kid he was previously arrested for assaulting. He tried to turn the brother into a sex zombie, and at some point the kid got out. He was stumbling around and some ladies called the cops when they saw the kid. The kid was serious messed up. While Dahmer found the kid while the kid was in police custody, Dahmer was able to convince the cops to release him into his custody. Great police work. If I recall, the kid was dazed and handcuffed. He convinced the cops that it was just a rough sex play, gay lovers quarrel. The boy was a minor. He took the kid back to his chamber of horrors and killed him. Dr. Harold Shipman. He lost his mother watching how morphine eased her pain before she passed. Then he became a doctor, using morphine overdoses to kill people, especially rich old ladies, and wrote himself into their wills with forgery. He was eventually caught because it was suspicious that every single one of his patients had him in their will, and that they all died under his care. But he did inherit a number of estates and a lot of money before getting caught. TLDR. Doctor killed patients and stole their money using the same drug that eased his dying mother's pain when he was younger. He grew up on the street where I live now in Nottingham. I discovered this when I was watching a documentary on him, and the narrator was walking down the street talking about his childhood, and he walked past my house. The most recent one I've studied that stuck with me is Gary Ridgway. The guy got away with life in prison by giving away the spots where his victims were buried and made the police take him back to the sites to relive the crimes over again. In court videos, he just sits like a deer in the headlights as families of his victims tell him he'll burn in heck and other very nasty things, understandably. But the father of one of his victims was hardcore Christian, and he got up to the stand and said, "Despite everything you've heard today, I believe in Jesus Christ's teachings and he believes in forgiveness, and sir, I forgive you." And it brought the serial killer to tears, to which the judge told him he didn't have a right to fake any form of guilt, which he clearly didn't have. Most serial killers don't actually have a pattern, and it's estimated there are at least a couple dozen active serial killers. They're also pretty average in terms of intelligence and whatnot. Paul Tucklin, a Polish serial killer, was admitted into psychiatric ward. He started making sculptures out of bread and was quite good at it. He fell in love with one of the doctors there, and to show his affection he made a vagina out of bread. He used natural hair too, and then gave it to the doctor. She then suffered a mental breakdown. Thin says love like pasta bread. That some of them kill just because they enjoy doing it, like a person might enjoy fishing or having a nice meal. Some people just kill others because they enjoy it in some way. The interview with Arthur Shawcross really stuck with me, as he described the people he killed and was so calm and nonchalant about it, like it was something he did as commonly as using the bathroom or eating a meal. Ted Bundy helped in the investigation of the Green River Killer and made a psych profile which ended up being closer to the actual Green River Killer than the FBI's own psych profile. That was also a huge part of the inspiration for Silence of the Lambs. Bundy also tried to masturbate to photos of his crime scene when Detective Keppel brought them in, which is why he stopped letting Bundy keep the files. I've been hearing little facts about Bundy for years now, and I always manage to learn some new, fricked up thing. Richard Kuklinski killed a man and left his body in an oil drum outside of a diner just to see how long it would take for someone to investigate. He would order sandwiches from the place and sit on the drum while he ate. He also made a clicking noise with his mouth when he was angry. If you heard that, you were as good as dead. If you like serial killers, UFOs, conspiracy theories, and stuff like that, I can't recommend Last Podcast on the Left enough. It's insanely informative, and also insanely funny. Kuklinski is my favorite episode by them. More than one has talked about feeding people to other people without the eater's knowledge. Joe Metheny is one that immediately comes to mind, but I know I've read of others doing the same. My grandmother met Ted Bundy on her college campus. and he attempted to get her friend to go off with him. My grandmother said she got a bad vibe from him because he was such a happy person, and she felt like he was forcing the emotion a bit much. Her friend, however, wanted to go with him and was completely blinded by his charm. My grandmother took her friend by the hand and walked away. She said his face changed completely as they did. It's crazy to me that with charm and looks alone, girls were willing to go with him even after several had gone missing or had been found dead. Not necessarily a serial killer, but Joseph Mengele, the Angel of Death, was awarded for bravery when he jumped into a burning tank to pull out a wounded soldier. I always found that interesting, how you could risk your life to save someone and then spend the rest of it torturing and slaughtering people. He didn't think of them as human, or at least not same the level of humanity. They were lesser and therefore inferior and not worthy of the same level of empathy a proper human would be. The Zodiac Killer's Paul Steinkapp murder had an eyewitness description, but there was a mix-up and the police looked for the opposite of who the witnesses described. Later, when the search team was hidden the original description, after they had stopped looking, 2 of the officers reported seeing a man who matched it walking down the street. Jeffrey Dahmer tried to make sex zombies out of some of his victims by drilling holes in their heads while they were alive and pouring acid into the holes. The twistedness and desperation of such an act is fascinating and truly goes to show how disturbed he was. Makes you wonder too what would have happened if he was successful. Like, would he stop killing or would he just amass a growing harem of sex slaves? Yeah, Dahmer was really into the idea of totally owning someone, having complete control over a human being. I believe that was why he ate some of them, to sort of absorb control their essence. Dean Call, also known as the Candy Man, was a serial killer who had 2 teenage accomplices. He repeatedly paid them to lure other teenage boys to his house for him to kill. The really fascinating part is how it all ended up going down. Pretty much, his one accomplice, Elmer Wayne Henley Jr., was out looking for victims one night when instead he ran into a female friend whose father had been abusing her. Henley ended up taking her and a male friend to Call's home in order to escape the abuse. As expected, Call wasn't too excited about a girl being brought because he usually exclusively killed boys, so Henley and his 2 friends wake up tied up. Call says that he's going to kill them all, but Henley manages to talk his way into getting untied so he can help Call kill the others instead. Before anything happens though, Henley grabs Call's gun and pretty much refuses to harm the girl, saying that Call's gone too far this time. Call starts goading Henley, saying that he won't shoot him. Henley does in fact shoot him. He ends up untying the 2 other teens, who end up telling Henley to call the police. During the call, Henley admits to shooting Call, and he goes on to confess to everything when the investigation into Call and the shooting begins. Probably the craziest part of this story is what Henley said to his male friend while waiting for the police to show. If you weren't my friend, I could have gotten $200 for you. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.